Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I'm going to start with a question and let me know if we have done this in any of the first few classes. I don't think we have, or maybe we have. It's almost 50-50. Or honestly, I cannot remember if I did this with you. But the question is that we learn things from the Quran, right? So there are some things which are very well known and everybody has heard about them. So, for example, backbiting, that it's not good to backbite others. ठीक है? But what happens in our lives is that we end up sometimes falling into this sin, right? Similarly, any other thing that we already have knowledge of, we have heard about it, we know that it's not right to do something, right? So we have that knowledge about the don'ts of religion, जो हमने नहीं करना लेकिन हम कम कर बैठते हैं, या the do's of religion के जो चीज़ हमने करनी है वो हम नहीं करते. तो इस नॉलेज या इल्म होने के बावजूद क्यों ऐसा होता है कि हम उस पर एक्शन नहीं कर सकते. यानी we have the knowledge. So what is the second? The first thing is knowledge, right? You need to have knowledge of the do's and the don'ts. And the second thing is action, that you actually need to change yourself in that manner that Deen is telling us to change, right? So why is it sometimes that our actions are not affected? So I would like you guys to sort of give me your ideas. What are the different reasons that, we may not be. So I'm going to put a third thing here. We're going to talk about that. So what are the different reasons, right, that what we know we are unable to act upon it? ठीक है, तो हमारे एक्शन क्यों मुतासर होते हैं, हमारे एक्शन में क्यों कमी रह जाती है, ये बात, इसका आप मुझे, यू कैन गिव योर ओन व्यूज. What do you think? And let me know if we have already done this before and if we came to the conclusion, because have this feeling that we did it in one class, but I'm really not sure. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to start off decline of knowledge and rise of ideology with this in mind. So this is, how many of you have started reading Decline of Knowledge? Anyone? थोड़ा बहुत शुरू किया है या स्किम किया हो? You can type in the chat box or raise your hand if you have. Nobody started it, तो वो last moment पे आपने छोड़ा है आज के लिए. चलें. So okay, so give me your suggestions on why we're unable to act. Okay, Fatima has done it, inshallah. I mean, has started at least, right? Okay, great. So you'll understand it more honestly if you've just started reading. It'll be easier for you, inshallah. So okay, any ideas why are we unable to act upon the knowledge we have? इल्म हमारे पास होता है लेकिन हम उस पर अमल नहीं कर सकते, or we fall short in doing the amal, right? No one? You're all at home or in the hostel, as in you can, I think, go and get a cup of tea if you want, right? Lekin please give some feedback, something, and let me know if we've already done this before, because honestly I was unable to remember clearly if I have done this with your batch. मुझे लग रहा था कि शुरू में मैंने किसी क्लास में ये थोड़ा सा मेंशन किया था and we did a bit of it.
No, ma'am, we didn't do it
Maybe.
before.
Okay, wait, I can't hear you. So okay, one is we have lack of faith. Okay, so one I'll put here. Anybody else? Somebody unmuted their mic, but I wasn't able to hear. Okay, worldly, too engaged in the word. So too much of anything is bad, right? Anybody else? अच्छा और क्या reasons हो सकती हैं? What about ये तो नहीं है लोग क्या कहेंगे तो नहीं है in this situation? Can anybody think of a situation in which we know we should do something लेकिन हम we're thinking not about what we should do according to Deen, but we're thinking about what society wants perhaps. Okay, so okay, lack of importance. Yani if you're not giving importance to it, right? It depends on how much importance we give to it. तो इसमें भी आप कह लें कि इसमें नॉलेज की कमी है, ठीक है? अगर कोई उसको इम्पोर्टेंस नहीं दे रहा किसी भी डूज एंड डोंट्स को रिलीजन के, तो इसका मतलब है कि उसके नॉलेज में कमी है. Because if they have the proper knowledge of deen, then they would realize the importance of everything, right? So you can say I am going to put this word ignorance, and if you remember शुरू की आपकी readings जो थी उसमें ये word आया था, ठीक है? कि according to the Islamic tradition, तो सबसे बड़ा हमारा vice है. The one thing that gets us into trouble is ignorance, like not knowing. Ignorance means not knowing. तो इसमें भी lack of knowledge आ जाता है, ठीक है? In this situation. All right, exactly. So lack of importance या priorities आपकी अगर different है, तो उसमें ये ignorance का aspect आ रहा है. That you are unaware कि वो चीज़ कितनी important है, right? Right. So peer pressure यानी society का definitely ये होता है. There a lot of times it's peer pressure or what others will say or wanting to fit in. ठीक है? You want to fit in the crowd, right? Be part of the crowd and not someone different. So that is a lot of times something that stops us from acting upon our knowledge, acting upon what we know. और इंटरेस्टिंगली हमारे दीन में ये बात है कि अगर आप अमल करेंगे उस चीज़ पर जिसके पास जो आपके पास इल्म है, ठीक है, जो आपका इल्म है, इफ़ यू एक्ट अपॉन इट, if you do, can you look at in the Arabic language how close they are? Only the meme and the lam are different. Ilm and amal. That also tells you something about these two words. तो आप ये हदीस आती कि अगर इल्म करें आप उस पर सॉरी अमल करें उस पर जो आपके पास इल्म है, तो अल्लाह ताला आपको इस इल्म में बढ़ाएंगे. You will get even more knowledge, and then you should increase your action, and then you get more knowledge. Okay, we have the notion that we classify guna into bigger or smaller based on our own thinking, and therefore we end up doing a lot of guna which are big, but we think they are small. So again, lack of knowledge, I guess, lack of ilm about major, minor. Sometimes, according to our own rationality, or intellect, or logic, we consider some actions as minor sins, right? And then we don't view them as importantly as we should. Okay, so one more thing is to appear better. So Nimra is saying that one more thing is that to appear. Yeah, let's just put appearance here. Okay, so appearance matters. It's very So we want to appear better or feel better. Yes, appearance or feeling better. And I think we can also, in other words, say that, when we're talking about feeling better, we're talking about something that is in the now. So we're giving more importance to the present, I guess, right? What are other ways that you can put this? There are other similar situations. Okay, so we have nafs here by Muzammil Imran. So yes, so it could be our nafs that is enticing us towards something or making us lazy about not doing something, right? Acha, temporary pleasure. यहाँ पे मैं इसको इस तरह भी लिख रही हूँ. So sometimes because of the temporary pleasure that we're getting out of something, and again this ties into the nafs as well. So the nafs is getting that temporary pleasure, and then you don't want to think about the long term, right? Okay, jealousy थोड़ा सा आप explain करें इसको. Jealousy की वजह से क्या हो सकता है? So jealousy is an emotion, ठीक है? And you're saying that इसकी वजह से we can end up backbiting even though we know it to be wrong, but it's sort of the emotion that is causing us, right? So let me know, Nimra, if that's what you meant. Let me just... Okay, so another one is thinking that we may do istighfar later in life. Okay, so great. ये जो आपने बात की है ना, thinking that we might do istighfar later in life. This is known by the scholars as long hopes. One of the ways that in English you can put it is long hopes. और इसको आप कह सकते हैं आपने लंबी उम्मीदें बांधी हुई हैं अल्लाह ताला से, right? या अपने आप से. So you are sort of hoping, right, for that sometime in the future, which you don't even know you will reach or not, but you think that I will reach that part of my life and then I will do the bar and then I'm going to change myself. So you're basically um, delaying change because of this. Okay? So you're delaying change because of that. Okay. Now, interestingly, you're getting closer to what we know as Sufism. When we start discussing this topic, we're getting closer to Sufism. And your decline of knowledge and rise of ideology is talking about this Ihsani tradition. So, what the author calls it, he calls it the Ihsani tradition. This comes from the third term, Ihsan, from the Hadith Jibreel, right? तो कोई भी चीज़ खूबसूरती से करना, that is essentially what Sufism is. Okay, we're gonna open up that document in a while, inshallah. I hope all of you have it. Otherwise, I can share it here in the chat box, the PDF. And when we're talking about jealousy or emotion, this is exactly what Sufism या एहसानी tradition जो है हमारा, वो हमारी soul के ऊपर काम करने के लिए कहता है. And do you guys remember the session we had in which you came up with all of the questions that you would have wanted answered, right? Or वो अभी I was looking at that screenshot that I took that day. तो उसमें एक ये था purification of the soul, right? So when we're talking about, having ilm, ठीक है, but not doing amal on it, we come to this important conclusion that there's something missing. ठीक है, all of these things that we have put here, it could be something in the world, it could be peer pressure, it could be just being too involved in your worldly engagements, and again lack of faith, so lack of yaqeen. So we are not, यानी हमने अपने ऊपर इतना काम नहीं किया कि हम यकीन हमें हो जाए कि हम सर्टेनिटी तक पहुंच जाएं, तो हमने अपने फेथ को स्ट्रांग नहीं किया, राइट? सो दिस इज एवरीथिंग दैट सूफीज्म इज एड्रेसिंग. आप यकीन कैसे हासिल कर सकते हैं? वो बैठे बैठे तो नहीं हो जाएगा, राइट? कि आप बस just wait, keep waiting and then एक दिन आपको यकीन आ जाए. No, Allah says in the Quran that worship Allah until you attain certainty. right? وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. So Sufism or tasawwuf is the better word. Sorry, tasawwuf, one S I think is better, and then double W. Tasawwuf addresses all of these things. Why is it that we're unable to do amal? So it cannot be, because if you look at, you know, the spirit or spirituality in the secular sense, ठीक है, secularity, secular sense में या आप किसी और religion के हिसाब से अगर आप देखें कि spiritual aspect तो आपको हर जगह मिल सकता है, right? So if you're looking at a secular point of view, they're gonna put spirituality as something different from do's and don'ts. यानी उसको वो एक और कैटेगरी में ले आते हैं. वो कहते हैं डूज एंड डोंट सेपरेट चीज़ है और स्पिरिचुअलिटी डिफरेंट चीज़ है. मिस्टिसिज्म भी एक वर्ड इस्तेमाल होता है इसके लिए, ऑलराइट. हाउएवर आपकी इस्लामिक ट्रेडिशन में आपकी हिस्टोरिकल अगर आप देख लें, you know, every written work on Sufism or tasawwuf, they're going to make it a part of your deen. It's not something separate. क्योंकि दीन क्या चाह रहा है, वो चाह रहा है हम चेंज करें अपने आप को, एक अच्छे अमल की तरफ लेकर जाएं, अपने आप को, अपने इमोशंस भी करेक्ट करें, ठीक है. तो हम अपने सोल को प्यूरिफाई कर रहे हैं और उसकी रीज़न क्या है कि हमारा एक्शन सही हो जाए, ठीक है ना. सो हियर दिस इज वेयर द थर्ड थिंग कम्स इन, purification of the soul. It's a lot to do with the soul or the qalb, the spiritual heart. Okay, there's something in the chat. Wise people act on what they know, foolish people know but don't act on what they know. Yes, ठीक है. So this is यानी a part of hikmat, ठीक है, that if you have that wisdom, ठीक है, or if you have hikmah, तो आप ये realize करेंगे that you know what is my priority. तो आपकी priorities जो किसी ने यहाँ पे लिखा था कि आपकी priorities क्या हैं, you will be well aware of your priorities, right? Another thing that I always end up putting here, just to give you a better analysis, पे आप सोचते रहे, you can come up with other things. Why is it that we have ilm about something but we don't have the amal? A lot of times it's also just a lack of love for Allah. That's why love for Allah is such an important part of Sufism or tasawwuf, right? So in the Quran, Allah says that those who believe are intense or passionately intense in their love for Allah. यानी अशद्द हुब्ब लिल्लाह, ये वर्ड यूज हुआ. अशद जो है, शदीद, उर्दू का वर्ड शदीद है ना, that comes from this word, ठीक है. So this is an Arabic word. वल्लदीना आमनु अशद्दु हुब्ब लिल्लाह, they are ashad or shadid in their love and their hubb for Allah, ठीक है. तो believers, यानी एक बात तो ये कि जब इंसान काम करते हैं अपने ऊपर, ठीक है, यकीन की तरफ जाना चाहता है, अपने ईमान पे मेहनत करता है, so that gets coupled with their increase in love for Allah. उसमें आपने नॉलेज भी इंक्रीज करना है, अपना एक्शन भी पहले इंक्रीज कर लेना है ना. कैन यू सी द सर्कुलर थिंग दैट वी आर गेटिंग ओवर हियर? सो इफ यू वांट टू इंक्रीज इन योर एक्शन, आपने अपने सोल के ऊपर काम करना है. सोल के ऊपर काम करने के लिए आपको एक्शन की भी ज़रूरत है. You want yaqeen, you have to start worshipping Allah. So remember, one of the first questions somebody asked, what's the point of fasting and prayer and hajj? All of these things are actually so that we can purify our soul. यानी हम ऐसे इंसान बन जाएं इस दुनिया में कि हम एंजल से भी ऊपर चले जाएं, because we have the capacity to go towards something wrong as well. लेकिन हम उसको छोड़ के जब हम good action choose करते हैं, तो we become higher than angels, क्योंकि angels don't have a choice, right? So despite having the choice of doing something wrong, we do something right. तो हमने अपने आप को प्योरीफाई करना है, हम अपने कल्ब को, स्पिरिचुअल हार्ट को प्योरीफाई करना है, and that is one of the greatest maqsad or greatest purposes of life. So the question that somebody had was, what is the purpose of life? ठीक है. The one thing in the Quran that's mentioned is कि अल्लाह की इबादत करना. इबादत इबादत का जो वर्ड है उसमें अब्द आ रहा है, अरबिक में अब्द आ रहा है, ठीक है. अब्द मीन्स स्लेव ऑफ अल्लाह. So the purpose of life is to remember that we are nothing without Allah. अगर अल्लाह ताला ना चाहें तो जो कुछ हमारे पास है वो ना हो. सांस हम ले रहे हैं वो नहीं होगा, खाना हम खाते हैं आराम से हजम हो जाता है वो नहीं होगा, ठीक है. So everything, every single blessing that we have is from Allah. So to remind ourselves of that, तो ये जो presence की मैंने उस दिन बात की थी, I had mentioned this and said that this is basically presence with God. It's teaching us to remember Allah. All of these things are reminding us of priorities of who Allah is, right? And what is our purpose of life. So namaz bhi hame purpose of life ki taraf hi leke ja rahi hai. Remember I said that they're connected sort of, right? So why is ibadat a purpose of life? Because it's taking us to the knowledge of Allah. Love for Allah can only happen if you know Allah, right? So knowing your own self, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of this, Allah created the world so that he could be known. So वो कैसे, how would he be known? He would be known by whom? These humans. Now, no matter how imperfect we are, this is one amazing thing that we have, is that we can love Allah, we can know Allah and we can love Allah. And we can, जिस Allah Ta'ala कहते हैं कुरान में कि हर चीज़ दुनिया में, ठीक है, हेवंस और अर्थ में हर चीज़ जो है वो अल्लाह ताला की तस्बीह बयान कर रही है, ठीक है. इंसान ही है जो गाफिल हो जाता है, इंसान ही है जो इग्नोरेंट हो जाता है, बट एवरी सिंगल अदर थिंग रिमेंबर्स अल्लाह, ठीक है. दे आर प्रोक्लेमिंग द majesty of Allah in their own manner. Acha. Now let me open up this decline of knowledge. So what is decline of knowledge all about? Is there anyone who doesn't have this PDF? I can share it here. So if you check your chat box, I'm going to send the PDF here just in case you don't have it. Okay? I'm not sure if I sent it to you last time or I accidentally sent it privately. Just hold on. It should be everyone in the meeting. Okay, so I've sent it in the chat box. On the decline of knowledge and the rise of ideology in the modern Islamic world. So remember when we had our discussion, I said that knowledge is not just the do's and don'ts, it's also knowledge of Allah. It's the knowledge of what is, yani actually what is true, right? Actually what is kama hiya Arabi mein isko kaha jata hai. Kama hiya, how, what is and how it is. Isme aayega aapki is reading mein. So I'm just going to skip a little bit and show you the highlighted parts. From an Islamic perspective, it could be said that ignorance is our only true foe and that knowledge is our only true need. यानी सबसे बड़ा जो मसला है इंसान के साथ वो उसकी गफलत है. हमारा यानी our disinterest in not getting knowledge and not knowing what this universe is about, what is the purpose of life, not thinking about these things. ये मतलब first step होता है. और नॉलेज इज़ आवर ओनली ट्रू नीड. जब हमें इल्म सही वाला हासिल हो जाता है, इसलिए अरबिक में या आपकी इस्लामिक ट्रेडिशन में इल्म नाफिया किस चीज़ को कहा जाता है? वो इल्म जो कि हमें नफ़ा पहुँचाए, ठीक है. सो इल्म नाफिया इज़ दैट बेनिफिशियल नॉलेज विच the scholars explain it as that knowledge which necessarily causes you to act. So can you see when we talked about having ilm and not being able to do amal on it, ilmun nafi' is something which necessarily causes you to act on it. अमल आपका उस पर ज़रूर होता है. ऐसा इसलिए दुआ भी ये होती है कि ऐसा इल्म अल्लाह ताला हमें दे जो इल्मुन नाफिया हो, जो बेनिफिशियल हो हमारे लिए, ठीक है. तो वो नेसेसरली आपको एक्शन की तरफ लेकर जाएगा. That means again that it's not just knowing the do's and the don'ts, because that's not enough to take us towards amal, right? Isn't it? It's actually deeper than that, and that's what the tasawwuf will talk about. This is what, um, when we're talking about the tasawwuf, we're talking about those scholars who focused more on this inner purification of the soul. Okay, so for when applied and lived, यानी जब ये knowledge apply की जाती है और इसको live किया जाता है, इस पर अमल किया जाता है, तो knowledge provides all that is necessary to overcome our spiritual, moral, emotional, and even physical decrepitude. Decrepitude, sorry. Okay, page 41. Indications of Islam's intellectual decline can be found in all the traditional Islamic sciences. On the one hand, jurisprudence or fiqh has been abused by extremists so as to excuse and even promote suicide killings. On the other hand, it has been abandoned by modernists because they believe it is rooted in a medieval code of life, which is not applicable in the New World Order. तो एक तरफ तो एक्सट्रीमिस्ट ने उसको बहुत लिटरल ले लिया, जो इल्म आया था through the scholars, the ulama. They took it too literally, ठीक है? And on the other hand, the modernists completely abandon it. वो उसकी तरफ जाते ही नहीं है. वो कहते हैं कि वो तो एक ज़माने के लिए सारा इल्म था और आजकल के लिए तो it doesn't suffice us. ठीक है? If you go down here, all of the dimensions of this intellectual decline cannot be covered in one essay or even one book. Here we will focus on one dimension of the Islamic intellectual heritage whose true nature has been abandoned. So we're going to talk about the Ihsani tradition. जो इसका असल nature है ihsan का या tasawwuf का, वो या तो abandon हो चुका है या reject हो चुका है या भूल चुके हैं. Like most of us don't even know what it is, right? That there is something like that. For much of the modern period, in this essay, it is referred to as the Ihsani intellectual tradition. So I'm talking about the Savaf or the Ihsani intellectual tradition. Okay? Ihsan is an Arabic word which comes from the root Hasan, Hasana, okay? Meaning to be beautiful, good, fine, or lovely. The word Ihsan is the noun form of the verb ahsana, which means to make beautiful, good, fine, or lovely. Ihsan thus means making beautiful or good, or doing what is beautiful or good. So making our own selves beautiful as well, making the soul beautiful. Okay? Because again, the soul is a prior aspect of ourselves. प्रायोरिटी जो है वो सोल को क्यों दी जाती है? क्योंकि इंसान बाहर से तो जितना मर्जी खूबसूरत लगे, ठीक है ना, eventually when we grow older we're gonna get wrinkles, we're not as beautiful, etc. यानी जो आपकी ज़ाहिरी ब्यूटी है वो तो ऊपर नीचे हो सकती है, ठीक है, बट जो सोल की ब्यूटी है, अगर सोल के ऊपर काम किया हो तो then that is everlasting, that is what will endure. वो तो हमेशा रहने वाली है. वो आपको यानी इट एक्चुअली मेक्स अ पर्सन ब्यूटीफुल. ये भी आपने सुना होगा, लिटरेचर में भी बहुत होता है कि जब सोल या किसी का दिल अच्छा हो, साफ हो, तो वो ब्यूटी चेहरे पे नजर आती है. इवन दो somebody can say कि ज़ाहिरी तौर पर इस इंसान के फीचर्स अच्छे नहीं हैं, but that doesn't matter because their heart is good, right? So the Ihsani intellectual tradition begins with the teachings of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, who told his companions that God has ordained ihsan for everything. कि अल्लाह ताला ने हर चीज़ के लिए एहसान ordain किया. इसका मतलब क्या है कि अगर आप एक प्लम्बर हैं, अगर आप एक पेंटर हैं, यानी आप बॉल्स पेंट कर रहे हैं, आप एक बिल्डर हैं, या आप रिक्शा चलाने वाले, यानी वट एवर जॉब यू हैव, या आप एक स्टूडेंट हैं IBM में, आपकी जो भी जॉब है या आप जो भी इस वक्त प्रेजेंट में कर रहे हैं, आपने उसको अच्छे तरीके के साथ करना है. दिस इज़ व्हाट अ मुस्लिम इज़ टॉट टू डू. दिस इज़ वन ऑफ आवर पर्पसेस इन लाइफ. हम खलीफतुल्लाह कैसे बन सकते हैं? अल्लाह के खलीफा और डेप्यूटी ऑन अर्थ कैसे बन सकते हैं? जब हम हर चीज़ एहसान के साथ करें. And remember we talked about like knitting or anything that we do and put a lot of time into it. तो उसमें हमें खुद भी फ़ायदा होता है because we're doing it in that beautiful manner. When we make something good, we feel good. तो हमने अच्छा somebody had mentioned कि sometimes appearance या feeling good की वजह से हम छोड़ देते हैं वो चीज़ जो कि यानी सही थी, हमें पता था कि हमें करनी चाहिए बट हम नहीं करते. सो इमेजिन वही बात है कि अब इल्मुन नाफे क्या है कि हम इस चीज़ को समझें, हम हमें ये knowledge हासिल हो that actually when I do all of this, I am gonna feel even better. शुरू में शायद थोड़ा सा मुश्किल होता है because when we're changing our habits, it is harder, right? But at the end of the day, the people who work on their inner selves, they are the ones who attain the greatest satisfaction or contentment. So this is from Hadith Jibreel, this other explanation of what ihsan is. The central manifestation of the practice of ihsan took form in what is traditionally known as Sufism or Islamic mysticism, where the emphasis is on making one's heart and soul beautiful, so that beauty will arise naturally from within. But the Ihsani tradition has taken on many forms under many names throughout Islamic history. Wherever there has been a vibrant Islamic civilization, be it Sunni or Shi'i, the Ihsani tradition, intellectual tradition, has been present in one form or another. Though it is not absent from the modern world, its political, social, and intellectual influence has decreased dramatically. So, from the perspective of the Isai intellectual tradition, perception and understanding are not merely a way of knowing, they are moreover a way of being. ठीक है, तो अल्लाह ताला ने कितनी दफ़ा कहा है, जो कैसर ने यहाँ लिखा है तकवा, right? That what is it? I think you're answering this question that what is in Munafir. So taqwa, Allah Ta'ala ne kaha hai कि ittaqullah, have taqwa of Allah, be aware of Allah, right? तो ये जो तकवा है, this is this awareness of God's omnipotence and omnipresence. And this is the ultimate purpose of being human. Not all the solutions to the melee of Islamdom lie within this dimension of the Islamic tradition. Nonetheless, its absence from contemporary discourse is among the most severe of the symptoms indicating the illness of the whole. अच्छा, ये किसी ने लिखा है private chat है, that in the past people used to see the Malikul Maut, but as time went by, we cannot see them. So I remember one of our helpers in Lahore, her husband passed away, and she said that literally 7 minutes before he passed away, even longer before that, he was asking all of his kids to be there because he knew. And 7 minutes before he passed away, he said that they're here to take me. So apparently, he could see them. आज भी ऐसा होता है, but you're right that sometimes we're so cut off from the spiritual world. We're so involved in worldly, in the worldly, mundane, um, zahiri appearances, or what you can call the material world, कि हम spiritual से दूर हो जाते हैं. That could be one of the reasons. And sometimes it's also that if a person is in the throes of death, they may not be able to share it with others, right? But before we examine some teachings of the Ihsani intellectual tradition, we must first look to the Islamic view of the human being. For all of the Islamic sciences, from philosophy to jurisprudence, are designed to address the one shortcoming of man from whence all other shortcomings stem. So ignorance again is mentioned here. This Christian aspect, Christian view क्या है? Original sin का है. ठीक है, उनका जो अंडरस्टैंडिंग है ना कि इंसान गलती क्यों करता है, ओरिजिनल sin की वजह से. मुसलमान कहते हैं आपकी फितरत तो प्योर है, लेकिन इग्नोरेंस की वजह से या फॉरगेटफुलनेस की वजह से. अल्लाह ताला कुरान में कहते हैं ना कि इंसान जो है वो फॉरगेटफुल है, इंसान भुलक्कड़ है, तो हमें अपने आप को रिमाइंड कराना पड़ता है. नमाजें 5 वक्त क्यों पढ़नी है? हमने अपने आप को रिमाइंड कराना है. कुरान क्यों पढ़ना है हमने? बिकॉज वी हैव टू. Yes, I mean, एक दफ़ा let's suppose somebody does दौरा Quran and they say कि मैंने शुरू से एंड तक पढ़ लिया Quran. But why do we need to go back to it again and again? Because we are forgetful. So it's a reminder, right? In Islamic anthropology, the human is believed to have been created according to a norm or a fitra, in which he knows that there is no God but God, that God is the only source of truth. So this is again, a bit of it is repetition, as you can see. Okay? We've discussed this a lot of times. So what is new here is that this is what I was saying, immediate knowledge, which we talked about, what Ghazali said, dissipates doubt. आपका शक किस तरह खत्म होगा? जब आपको immediate knowledge हो of things as they are in themselves, kama hiya, the way they are, right? To possess such knowledge is the human norm, the fitra. So again, Ihsani tradition takes us back to our fitra. आपके जो सुन्ना is primordiality reading है, उसमें क्या, has anyone done that reading? तो प्राइमोर्डियल आई सेड मीन्स बैक इन टाइम, ठीक है, समथिंग दैट इज प्री हिस्टोरिक। तो हमारा जो प्राइमोर्डियल नेचर क्या है, इंसान का सिंप्लिसिटी था, हमेशा से सिंप्लिसिटी रहा है। तो सुन्ना जो है, नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की सुन्नत हमें उस सिंप्लिसिटी की तरफ बुलाती है, ठीक है। इस्लाम इन एसेंस इज वेरी सिंपल। हालांकि हम, ठीक है, अगर डिटेल में जा रहे हैं, देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ डेप्थ, देयर इज एन ओशन ऑफ नॉलेज आउट देयर। कुरान पढ़ लें आप, सुन्नत की स्टडी करें, नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की सुन्नत। एंड देन इवन इफ यू टॉक अबाउट एहसान, राइट, तसव्वुफ की जो हमें बातें पता चलती हैं, इनर प्योरिफिकेशन दैट वी लर्न फ्रॉम द कुरान एंड सुन्ना इटसेल्फ, कुरान और सुन्नत की ही कॉर्पस से हमें इसके बारे में पता चलता है। So all of that is very complex as well if you want to go very deep into it. But at the end of the day, what we have to do is very simple. दुनिया में जो हम करने आए हैं, it's very clear cut, it's very simple. तो इस्लाम हमें, और जो सुन्नत है नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की, वो हमें सिंप्लिसिटी की तरफ लेके जाती है, ठीक है। Now, if you see here, we talked about signs as well. Remember, Allah Ta'ala says that we shall show them our signs on the horizons and in themselves, until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. तो अल्लाह ताला हमें हर वक्त साइंस दिखा रहे हैं, inside of ourselves, our emotional selves हो सकते हैं, our physical selves हो सकते हैं, outside of us, the nature, अगर आप astronomy पढ़ लें, all of these are Allah's signs. So the human intellect is, in a sense, the ultimate decoder, which, when refined and polished, can witness the face of the divine in all of its many modes in all of creation. For Allah says in the Quran, wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. So to see all things as signs of God and be called to the remembrance of God in all modes of knowing is thus the human norm. तो हमारी फितरत क्या है कि हम हर हाल में अल्लाह को याद करें, ठीक है। हमें आज मॉडर्न वर्ल्ड में लगता तो है कि मुश्किल है, right, isn't it? Because we're so, I mean, even in namaz, when we're supposed to pray to Allah, we don't feel that we are connected to Allah or aware of Him. तो इसलिए ऐसे लगता है कि बहुत मुश्किल है, बट हमारी फितरत यही है। तो जब हम उस फितरत की तरफ जाएंगे, तब हमें सही सुकून मिलता है। जो असल कंटेंटमेंट इंसान को हासिल होती है, तभी होती है जब पर्पस पूरा करे। पर्पस ये है कि हर सिचुएशन में इंसान जो भी कर रहा हो, अल्लाह को याद रखे, सो दैट यू नो, if you're away from your family, let's suppose, so you remember your mother. It's like in the back of your mind, you might be studying, but you remember your mom, right? And as soon as you get free time, you want to call her up, okay? Yeah, yeah, on the flip side, the mother is always thinking of the child, right? तो अल्लाह ताला के साथ भी यही ताल्लुक है, to always remember him, because whenever you love a being, you inevitably remember them. So at least when you start remembering, namaz padhna insan shuru kare, theek hai? And we still have to talk about the change of habits. Inshallah, let me jot that down if we get time today. Um, okay, so ilmun nafi'a is that knowledge which does not benefit. Let me read this hadith to you. I hope you can see that arrow, that black arrow. As such, the Prophet would often pray, I seek refuge in God from knowledge which has no benefit. Right? So he used to pray कि Allah Ta'ala उस इल्म से बचाएं जिसका कोई फ़ायदा नहीं है. A lot of times you may have heard कि आप इल्म हासिल करें अगर आपको चीन भी जाना पड़े, right? कई मरतबा लोग इसको समझते हैं कि just means worldly knowledge without any remembrance of Allah. यानी वो worldly knowledge भी इसलिए हासिल कर रहे होते हैं कि दुनिया की ही progress हासिल हो, better lifestyle, etc. They're not thinking about Allah at all. At the same time, a person who is doing a PhD in something, and it causes them to remember Allah. Even maths is such, mathematics, right? And physics, anything that you're studying, it can become a means for you to remember Allah. It's all in your intention. So the hadith, the world is accursed. Accursed is what is in it, save the remembrance of God and what supports it, and the teacher and the student. तो दुनिया जो है वो, let me just close this first. Hold on. दुनिया is accursed in what way? It doesn't mean कि आप ये कहें कि क्योंकि एक और हदीस में आता है कि दुनिया को या ज़माने को बुरा नहीं कहो क्योंकि अल्लाह सुब्हानहू ताला ने ही ज़माना बनाया है, ठीक है, दुनिया अल्लाह ने ही बनाई है। लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम दिस हदीस seems to be telling us something else, but in essence what it means is that if you're just going to be involved in this dunya, it's not going to get you anywhere, ठीक है। तो सवाए अल्लाह की याद के and what supports it, so whatever takes you towards that remembrance of Allah and the teacher and the student, तो again knowledge, क्योंकि ignorance ही इंसान का salvation से रोकती है, ignorance और lack of knowledge। तो इसलिए टीचर एंड स्टूडेंट को एक्सेप्शन यहाँ पर मेंशन किया गया। अच्छा, now if you go down, okay. As the Quran tells us, the day of judgment is a day when neither wealth nor sons. This is page 46. As the Quran tells us, the day of judgment is a day when neither wealth nor sons shall profit, except for one who comes to God with a sound heart. Illa man atallaha biqalbin salim. That person who comes to Allah with a sound heart. So that is again a purpose of this dunya, कि आप एक sound heart लेकर जाएं अल्लाह ताला के पास. So the tasawwuf is the science of how to get a sound heart. Okay? While the health of the heart has always been a concern for traditional Islamic scholars of every discipline, as for all serious Muslims, the individuals most dedicated to the purification of the heart are those historically identified as Sufis, usually defined as the mystics of Islam. ठीक है ना? So, but as the impetus for inner purification stems directly from the Prophet, most Sufis of the early Islamic community were in some way aligned with the Ahl al-Hadith movement. So when he's talking about the Ahl al-Hadith movement, it means the people of Hadith, the Muhaddiseen. Sufis sat with non-Sufis in circles where both jurisprudence and Hadith were taught, and there is no evidence that they were isolated from the social and intellectual influence of the populist movement of the Ahl al-Hadith. What distinguishes Sufis from other representatives of this movement is not that they sought inner purification, but this is a concern of all Muslims. It should be, right? It should be the concern. They were, however, singularly devoted to purification and believed that it cultivated an unadulterated mode of perception. Now, what he will say here is that again, Sufism is not about seeing colors or about, you know, ecstatic experiences. So he mentions here in the varieties of religious experience, wherein mysticism is portrayed as an emotional, trans-rational experience akin to drug-induced hallucinations. Spiritual methods were interpreted by James as the methodical cultivation of ecstatic moments of cosmic consciousness, and the entire enterprise was seen to be private and individualistic. तो अगेन हमें भी कई दफ़ा जब हम सूफीज मेंशन करते हैं तो लॉट ऑफ अस हैव दिस आइडिया कि वो कोई और ही चीज़ एक्सपीरियंस कर रहे हैं, ठीक है। लेकिन अगर आप उनकी बुक्स पढ़ें तो जो स्कॉलर्स थे, ठीक है, दे वर एंड अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स सूफीज जो बहुत फेमस सूफीज थे, दे वर आल्सो muftis or jurists, experts in jurisprudence. So they decried those who would only seek ecstatic experiences. तो उनकी किताबों में सूफीज ने ये लिखा हुआ है कि आपकी जो ecstatic experiences हैं, these are not the goal. They say, so there is a famous book, Sufism and Sharia, जिसका बहुत थोड़ा part, 1-2 pages आपके spirituality के first reading या second reading है शायद. That is from that book, Sufism and Sharia by Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi. And he wrote that this is not what we are seeking. It's not, the goal to see something weird or something paranormal, etc. The goal has been simply to remember God constantly and to see things as they are in themselves. To correct your priorities, right? To see what really is. Any experiences, visions, or ecstatic states were seen as accidental, and novices were even warned not to be deluded by visions and delights. So for a new person, if they start seeing something accidentally, okay, for whatever reason, it could be right. People have experienced such, you can call them spiritual states, etc. But they were not seen as the goal, and they were warned कि आप इसके पीछे मत जाएं. This is not the goal. It's just accidental. It's just marginal. Just do shukr if you see something, but don't think you've reached the goal. The goal is just to remember Allah. ठीक है. Acha. Though such rigors may lead to supernatural experiences that help one to better understand divine mysteries, people are only to engage in such practices for the soundness of religion, inspecting the states of the soul, and sincerity of action towards God. असल चीज़ इखलास है. Sincerity of action towards God means that आप इखलास के साथ जो भी कर रहे हैं वो अल्लाह की खातिर कर रहे हैं. और ये बहुत high level. It's not easy. It's a complete it's a lifelong एफर्ट. लाइफ लॉन्ग एफर्ट है कि इंसान जो है वो हर चीज़ इखलास के साथ करे. नमाज पढ़ रहे हैं तो किसी को दिखाने के लिए नहीं कर रहे, सिर्फ अल्लाह के लिए कर रहे हैं. ये कंटिन्यूस एफर्ट है. कोई अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं तो इसलिए नहीं कर रहे कि फलां देख के मुझे क्या कहेगा, अल्लाह को खुश करने के लिए कर रहे हैं. So this ikhlas, that's why it's Qul Huwallahu Ahad is called Surah Ikhlas, right? Because that is teaching us that Allah, it's a knowledge of Allah, right? Allah, there is no one like Him. He's Wahad, He's Ahad, right? He's Wahid, He is one, He is Al Ahad. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. So being our God, He deserves that, right? कि इंसान जो है वो हर चीज़ जो कर रहा है वो अल्लाह ताला के लिए कर रहा है. So it's also when you talk about love, it is that loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that only thing which can cause you to reach that ikhlas or that sincerity. Otherwise, why would you want to do anything for Allah? इसीलिए questions आते हैं ना ये कि I like what can my worship do for Allah? He doesn't need it, and that's true. He doesn't need it. It's actually for our own selves. Okay. So the idea that being ever mindful of the transcendental and the spiritual would necessarily turn one away from the affairs of this world is rarely found in Sufism. So Sufism के concept में ये नहीं है कि आप spiritual world में मतलब बैठ के आप जिक्र कर रहे हैं या दुनिया से अलहदा होकर बैठ गए हैं, ठीक है? Sufis speak of turning away from the world with the meaning of cutting the internal entanglements that come through greed, lust, and pride. It is not that the Sufi is not in the world, but that the world is not in him or her. So remember at that example I gave you of the boat, not to let the love of the world enter in the boat. That is our heart. तो हम दुनिया में हैं लेकिन दुनिया हमारे अंदर नहीं है, यानी दुनिया की मोहब्बत हमारे दिल में ना हो. This is what the Sufis say. You live in the world, you take care of all your responsibilities, but you are not in love with this world. The sign of the sincere Sufi is that he feels poor when he has wealth, is humble when he has power, and is hidden when he has fame, which is so interesting, isn't it? Which is why it sort of makes sense that Imam Ghazali wanted that, break from his fame. He had attained fame at such a young age, and he wanted to go into hiding in one way. And nobody can be, this is something that a person, decides for themselves. There can be very famous scholars. Some are actively involved in, reaching out, politics, etc. Another person can just be hidden, in the middle of the desert, and all people need to do is go and find them, and they will get gems of knowledge from them. So this is something again that a person needs to decide from themselves. यानी दोनों की गुंजाइश है. As long as he is carrying out his responsibilities, He can choose to do that, right? Okay, so any illicit act, even war, is open to the saint as long as he acts from the inner peace to which he has attained and remains in that peace. So this is very, you know, straightforward, right? You all know this. ये हजरत अली का वाकया भी है, right? That in during war, a person spit at him. He was about to kill someone, and then he spat at him. So just because he got angry at that action, he stopped his sword and he said कि नहीं, मैं इसको नहीं मारूंगा, क्योंकि अगर अभी मैं मारूंगा तो ये मैं अपने गुस्से से मार रहा हूँ, यानी मेरा गुस्सा बीच में आ गया. I was doing it solely for Allah, I was doing it just for Allah's sake, but मेरा ये जो इमोशन है कि इसने मेरे ऊपर थूका है, तो बीच में जब मेरा इमोशन आ गया तो मैंने ये नहीं करना, मैंने इखलास के साथ ही करना है. So you see, this example comes from the stories of the Sahaba. All right, very interesting. In the Sheikh of the Shadiliya Sufi order, Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari. So Ibn Ata'illah writes that your desire to disengage, this is here, your desire to just hold on, I didn't plug in my laptop. So Ibn Ata'illah is a famous Sufi, and he said that your desire to disengage, यानी आपकी जो ये चाहत है ना कि दुनिया से अलहदा हो जाना, disengage हो जाना, even though God has put you in the world to earn a living, is hidden passion. तो अगर कोई इंसान अपनी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी से हट के अलहदा होना चाह रहा है, and you know they might think that they're becoming God conscious, तो ये वो कहते हैं कि ये hidden passion है. You see this how much, मतलब बहुत scrutiny के साथ इन्होंने काम किया हुआ है, all of the scholars, right? And your desire to earn a living in the world, even though God has disengaged you, is a fall from supreme aspiration. अजीब, यानी दोनों चीज़ों में उन्होंने ना एक निकाला है कि ये एक हिडन पैशन हो सकता है. इसका मकसद क्या है? अगर आप ये देखें, आप ये पढ़ें, आप कहें अच्छा तो व्हाट शुड आई डू, लाइक व्हाट, यू नो, आइदर वे इट्स अ प्रॉब्लम कि मैं अगर अर्न कर रही हूँ, इफ आई एम अर्निंग अ लिविंग, इवन दो अल्लाह ताला ने हमें डिसंगेज किया है, इन द सेंस दैट अल्लाह सेड कि रिस्क तो आपको मिलना ही मिलना है. तो दिस इज अ फॉल फ्रॉम सुप्रीम एस्पिरेशन. इसका मतलब ये है कि इंसान जो लिविंग अर्न कर रहा है, ठीक है, जो काम हलाल काम करके हलाल कमाना चाह रहा है, वो भी इस नियत से कर रहा है कि अल्लाह की खातिर कर रहा है, अपनी उसमें चाहत नहीं आनी चाहिए. That's the amazing thing, doing everything for the sake of Allah. This is what the Sufis were proposing. So from this perspective, Sufism, like the religion of Islam, of which it is a fundamental expression, is a middle way in which everything is to be given its proper due. The world is not to be shunned outright, but it is not to be sought in itself. दुनिया को छोड़ना भी नहीं है, लेकिन उसको इस तरह से नहीं कमाना कि बस यही सब कुछ है, right? Though representatives of the Sufi tradition sought inner purification, stillness, and unmediated knowledge of the divine, many, such as Najmuddin Kubra, who perished in battle against the Mongols, Amir Abdul Qadir al Jazairi, who struggled against the French occupation of Algeria, has been examined in Riza Shah Kazimi's Recollecting the Spirit of Jihad, and Uthman Dan Fodiu, who transformed the religious life of Hausa land, sought to have the affairs of this world arranged in accord with transcendent principles, seeing this as one of the meanings of being Khalifatullah fil ard. Okay, sorry, there's something in the chat box. Let me read it first. So, mashallah. Okay, as far as mom is concerned, as we continue. So, no, I would disagree with Yahya here that we cannot say that knowledge is bad. We can knowledge itself, यानी in essence जो है ना वो नाफे ही होती है, यानी that's why we're praying for it कि इल्म नाफे ही हमें हासिल हो. But I guess, yeah, that knowledge which is not taking us close to Allah. So there is a condition here. That knowledge which is not reminding us of Allah, it becomes an obstacle in our becoming closer to Allah. वो knowledge बुरी होगी. ठीक है? So yes, that's the condition that you're going to put there. Okay. Mm, तो शुरू के जो सूफिया कराम थे, ठीक है, जो ट्रेडिशनल एनालिस्ट थे, उनका जो अंडरस्टैंडिंग था सूफीज़म का, वो बहुत फ़र्क था आजकल के अंडरस्टैंडिंग से. तो आजकल हमें ये बात नहीं समझ आती. सूफीज़म इज़ एक्चुअली द एसेंस ऑफ इस्लाम. For years, scholars and laymen, both Western and Muslim, have been guilty of assuming that the divisions and juxtapositions which modern man employs to analyze the world are reflections of age-old dichotomies. On the one hand, it is assumed that Islam is a rigid desert religion of the sword, whose most native expression is found in rigid reformist movements. On the other hand, Sufism is seen as a free, even supra Islamic expression of individual spirituality. In the early 19th century, many scholars looked for its origins in Hinduism and some in Christianity. Perhaps the best example of the tendency to view Sufism as an extra Islamic phenomenon is found by one of the earliest treatises of Orientalist studies of Sufism. So remember, I told you Orientalist study क्या चीज़ है? किसी एक्सटर्नल एजेंट ने ये इस्लाम पे अगर स्टडी किया, वो खुद मुसलमान नहीं है, तो वो कितना समझ सकता है दीन को? एक हद तक ही, राइट? तो उनकी जो स्टडी होगी ना, ओरिएंटलिस्ट स्टडी, एडवर्ड सईद, SAID, Said, wrote a book, Orientalism. Very famous. It's a very good book to read, and it's telling you about Orientalist studies. So that this is what the author is saying कि Orientalist study जो है वो गलत साबित करती है, वो गलत समझती है सूफीज़म को. उन्होंने सही नहीं समझा, ठीक है. um, but a close examination of the original sources reveals that the proponents of Sufism drew upon the same materials as other scholars and were an integral component of the scholarly community as a whole. The Sufis were part and parcel of the scholarly tradition. वो कुरान और हदीस से हटकर कोई बात नहीं कर रहे थे. They were getting everything from the Quran and the Sunnah, right? The Ahl al-Hadith movement, the jurisprudence, and the Sufis comprised intertwining circles, all right, whose methods overlapped. Whereas the jurisprudence, the Quranic commentators, right, and the Ahl al-Hadith transmitted knowledge in a way which could properly be called ta'aleem, the Sufis put more emphasis on inner training or tarbiyah. तो आपने सुना होगा ना, कई मर्तबा इस पर डिस्कशन होती है, तालीम एंड तरबियत. सिर्फ तालीम is not enough, you need tarbiyah as well. This is what it means, inner purification. और आपको याद होगा कि मैंने आपको एक आयत बताई थी in one of our previous classes कि इब्राहिम अलैहिस्सलाम prayed for a prophet in his progeny जो ये चार काम करे. Allah Ta'ala says that the Prophet Muhammad was sent for these four things, and tazkiyah comes first in it. لِيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ, कि वो उनको प्यूरिफाई करें. द फर्स्ट थिंग इज यतलु अलैकुम किताब, कि वो तिलावत करें कुरान की, ठीक है, आप पर. द सेकंड वाज तज़किया. सो इनर प्यूरिफिकेशन, द वर्ड तज़किया कम्स फ्रॉम दैट आया, ठीक है. बट तालीम एंड तरबिया और युअल्लिमुकुमुल किताब, दैट इज टॉकिंग अबाउट तालीम. So basically, talim and tazkiyah both are mentioned in the purposes of prophethood. Okay, the four purposes, the four main goals that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sent for. But talim and tarbiyah are by no means mutually exclusive. They are in fact complementary parts of a greater whole. By observing how closely connected the Sufis were with the Ahl al-Hadith, we can see that tarbiyah and tazkiyah were not just individual spiritual practices, but an important aspect of early Islamic pedagogy and thus intellectuality. The most famous of the early Sufis, Al-Junaid al-Baghdadi. I'm reading the highlighted parts here, okay? Hopefully you got that. Known as the Sheikh of Sheikhs. So Junaid al-Baghdadi was known as the Sheikh of Sheikhs, was also a practicing jurist who studied with many scholars known to be directly aligned with the Ahl al-Hadith. Many Sufis entered the path of Sufism because they found that the sciences of jurisprudence and hadith did not offer sufficient knowledge of God. तो वही बात है कि tasawwuf is also a knowledge of Allah. ठीक है, तो jurisprudence और हदीस अगर सिर्फ कोई पढ़ लेता है, लिटरली अगर लिटरल तरीके से इंसान पढ़ रहा है, तो वो sufficient knowledge इसलिए नहीं होगी because it's not just talking about reality as it is. But if you combine it with what the Sufis said, then you get a clearer picture of what deen is, because they sort of specialized in this area of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in such cases, one does not always find condemnations of the jurists and the Ahl Hadith themselves. यानी ये मतलब नहीं था कि सूफीज जो थे वो condemn कर रहे थे jurists को या मुहद्दिसीन को. Rather, a belief that their sciences are limited in scope. तो ये था कि ये limit हो जाए, यानी they are limited. इसमें ज़रूरी है कि हम ये आउटलाइन करें कि कुरान और हदीस से, सुन्नत से हमें एक रूह पता चल रही है कि दीन की रूह क्या है, वो हमें पता चले, right? So that is what Sufism is. Now, if you go down, they have separately outlined Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, ठीक है? So here the Ihsani tradition starts, and then so again it's a lot about habits, ठीक है? This part, the Ihsani tradition, is that basically it is habit formation. अपने आप को अच्छा करना या अपने सोल को प्योरीफाई करना, क्या चीज़ है कि इंसान अच्छे अमल करे, ठीक है? So to discipline ourselves in order to do what is beautiful, one must train oneself to be beautiful. It's training basically. So Sufism is neither regulations nor sciences, rather it is character traits. It's basically coming up with good character. The Prophet Muhammad said, I was only sent to complete the beautiful character traits. And among the best of you is the most beautiful in character traits. All right. Okay, so the most influential political figure of this time period, the Seljuk Nizamul Mulk, was renowned for his support of both Sufis and ulama. He established both madrasas and Sufi khanqahs. This is the time when Ghazali came to the forefront. Al-Farmadi was internal teacher of both Abu Hamid al-Ghazali and Ahmad al-Ghazali, two brothers. And of course, we know that Abu Hamid al-Ghazali became very famous. So in his revival of the religious sciences, the revival of the religious sciences is one of his very, very famous books. And here, if you remember, we talked about the four Platonic virtues or principles of virtue. This actually was first expounded by Plato. Okay? And then Imam Ghazali wrote about it in the lens of the Quran. Okay? So wisdom, al-hikmah, courage, temperance, and justice, from which derive all secondary virtues. So Ghazali believes that the human objective is to maintain the four cardinal virtues in perfect equilibrium, i'tidal. जब ये चीज़ें i'tidal में होती हैं, हिकमत, शुजा यानी करेज, इफ़्फ़ा यानी टेम्परेंस एंड अदल जस्टिस, जब ये i'tidal में होंगी, परफेक्ट इक्विलिब्रियम में होंगी, तो इंसान जो है वो positive character traits का मालिक होगा, ठीक है ना? First, he argues that the good deeds which result from equilibrium are not only recognized by the intellect but are also confirmed by revealed law, by the Sharia. Secondly, he believes that the Prophet Muhammad is the only person to have attained complete equilibrium. And this is something which I actually want you guys to do. I will discuss this with your TA. if we can have I'm not sure if we have time, but I think we do. If we can have short presentations, take it on two things. The first thing is that the Prophet ﷺ is the only person to have attained complete equilibrium, so he was perfect in that manner. His uswatul hasana, okay, was one of the most beautiful models of this equilibrium, ठीक है. और हर इंसान हर एक इंसान जो है वो यहाँ तक नहीं पहुँच सकता. We cannot reach that perfect sunnah model that the Prophet ﷺ brought to us. But then what is the point of that model? This is the question that you have to think upon and do the presentation on if we end up doing it. All right, so stylistically, Ghazali differs in that he precedes his explanation, I think that's what it says here, from selections from Quran, Hadith, and the sayings of. I can just close this. Okay, so again, you should focus on what we're doing in class for the quiz. ठीक है, जो parts हम इकट्ठे अभी कर रहे हैं, focus on that. I'm basically going to ask from what we have done together. All right, following upon the well-known saying of the Sufi master Ma'ruf al-Karhi, there is nothing in existence except God. Ghazali sees all of creation as having two faces, a face towards itself and a face towards its Lord. Everything is perishing save his face. So, Surah Ar-Rahman, وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. The only thing that is baki, yabqa, जो पीछे रह जाता है, वो अल्लाह ताला का, well, face from here means his countenance. ठीक है? So, because that is the most valued part of a creature. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ने ये इस्तेमाल किया कुरान पाक में, which means his countenance. So nothing stays, nothing is going to stay in on the earth on the day of judgment. Everything will perish. So there's this understanding कि एक point पे सब कुछ जो है वो खत्म कर दिया जाएगा, सवाए only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be existent, and then he will resurrect human beings. Not that each thing is perishing at one time or at other time, but it is perishing from beginninglessness to endlessness. Everything is perishing. The nature of this dunya is that joy doesn't stay. Gham जो है वो भी नहीं रहता. Gham भी over time heal हो जाता है. Even if it takes years, it heals. So nothing is constant. ये आपने सुना होगा कि दुनिया का एक जो चीज़ constant है ना दुनिया में, in this world, the one thing that is constant is that nothing stays constant. That everything is everything experiences change in this dunya. So it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is everlasting in all senses of the word. Okay. So okay, we've done till page number 58. ठीक है, हमने यहाँ तक कर लिया है. So for your quiz, it will be it will be till 60. ठीक है, यहाँ पे जो मैंने highlight किया हुआ है ये भी आप पढ़ लें. Till page number 60 for this quiz. ठीक है. What was that other thing that I had to do with you? I just jotted it down. Another thing you have to understand is when we're talking about ideology, ठीक है, we're saying that somebody has something in mind already. ठीक है, जो आपकी reading का title है Decline in Knowledge and Rise in Ideology. So what does ideology mean? It means कि आपके जहन में already एक मैप है, ठीक है, लाइक समथिंग शुड बी लाइक दिस. अब आप कुरान और हदीस को पढ़ेंगे एंड यू आर गोइंग टू मोल्ड इट अकॉर्डिंग टू दिस थिंग दैट यू हैड इन माइंड. हालांकि नॉलेज क्या चीज़ है? नॉलेज ये चीज़ है दैट यू आर टेकिंग द कुरान एंड हदीस एज इज, जैसे अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला ने कुरान और सुन्नत हमें पहुंचाई है, ठीक है, आप उसको उसी तरह ले रहे हैं और उससे आप नॉलेज हासिल करें. यू आर डिसाइफरिंग इट, you are with ikhlas, with sincerity, trying to figure out what the Quran and Sunnah are saying. So that's where ideology and knowledge are different. Okay? And the Ihsani tradition is a part of knowledge. It's not just something made up. So yes, please read the highlighted parts and उसके आगे पीछे थोड़ा सा अगर आप समझना चाह रहे हैं. So for example, let's suppose आपको highlighted part जो है वो क्लियर नहीं हो रहा, ठीक है, तो आगे पीछे थोड़ा सा पढ़ लें just to understand what that part is saying. So I want you to understand the highlighted parts well. This is what I mean. Okay? So yes, focus on the highlighted parts, inshallah. And
Excuse me, miss. What do you mean by Q and S that you have written right here? Could you repeat?
Sunnah, Quran and Sunnah. So remember we talked about Sunnah or Hadith ka kya farak hai? Sometimes I use the word Hadith, sometimes I use the word Sunnah. The Hadith are the texts that are telling us about the Sunnah. The Sunnah is the lived way of the lived life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ठीक है, तो पूरी शरीयत या पूरा जो दीन है वो हमें कुरान और सुन्नत से मिलता है. Okay, so again, knowledge takes time, it takes years, it takes a long time because you are without any previous notion, you are trying to understand something from scratch. ठीक है, ideology की rise जो हुई है in the modern world, it's because you have all of these secular notions of stuff and you sort of try to fit the Quran and Hadith into it. So it doesn't give you a clear picture of what really is because you have this lens already that you're watching something through. Okay, so I'm sorry, but the quiz tomorrow has to be in the first part. Yani as soon as your class starts, we want to have the quiz, inshallah, because your TA has some work and so this is you have to manage this. ठीक है, आप सही टाइम पे आ जाएं क्लास में इंशाल्लाह, and we're gonna have the quiz in the first part, and then we're gonna have the lecture. We're talking about today's CP. अच्छा नहीं, तो CP अच्छा नहीं, ये पे I will leave it to Zainab that they want it to be. I mean, how long will you accept the forms? It depends on that, right? I will leave that to Zainab. फिर आप पूछ लें. It's 48, 9:48. अच्छा. So again, I wasn't able to answer all of the questions. But I have the screenshot and we can keep going back to it, inshallah. And some of them will be answered in the course of this module itself, inshallah. So I've shared the PDF again on WhatsApp that has the highlighted parts saved so that it'll be easier for you, inshallah. Okay, just an announcement before I sign out. I have shared the 4 readings in the WhatsApp group for tomorrow's quiz. Um, the third reading, I have put the page numbers there. ठीक है, page 67 से लेके 80 तक है, यानी कि जो book के pages हैं, not the package pages but the book itself. तो ये जो 67 है, is starting from the Sunnah of the Prophet all the way till companions on the journey and a whole new vibe. ये page 80 तक है, ठीक है. इससे पहले जो है ना, it's about basically the prayer and the fasting. So she's written about just these basics. So since we started talking today about prayer, fasting, Hajj, you can have a read. You can read that if you want. But for the quiz, you just have to read from page 67 to page 80. Okay. So I will sign out now, inshallah. If you have any questions, please let me know. Send me a message on WhatsApp, and I can even hold a separate Zoom meeting for you if you have any questions at all. अभी पूछ लें, और अगर आपको separate time चाहिए, so office hours will start right now, and I can have a separate private meeting for anyone who wants to ask any questions. Okay. So I'm signing out now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So page 67 to 80 जो आप पूछ रही हैं, this is for the reading by Naima B. Robert from My Sister's Lips. ठीक है. तो page 67 to 80 उस reading के हैं. और अगर आप पैकेज की पेज नंबर्स देखेंगे तो आप it will be I think 229, 230 ठीक है से लेकर 236 तक पैकेज पेजेस. ठीक है, अगर कोई क्वेश्चंस नहीं है, आई एम एंडिंग द सेशन. अस्सलाम वालेकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू.